There are a lot of great benefits to being a union member, but there's one that almost makes the small cost of being a union member worth it all on its own. So let's talk about it. What I'm talking about is one of the single biggest benefits of being a union member and working in a union shop, and that's called Weingarten Rights. That's Weingarten. Think of beer garden, but with wine. Weingarten. It's spelled differently, but whatever. What Weingarten is it's the name of the precedent that allows union members to request representation whenever management's going to talk to them about an issue involving discipline. This right is so fundamental to being a union member. For example, I'm going to pull up an old business card here. This was my first business agent. But on the back of the business card, you can see that's your Weingarten Rights. It's requesting representation when you're going into an investigatory interview. Here's what it means to you. Here's what it means to you as a union member on the shop floor. All you need to know is, if a supervisor is going to ask you questions that may lead to discipline, you ask for a union rep. You get a shop steward or a rep from the union, but we'll get into that later. Let's talk about real quickly what an investigatory interview is. So what an investigatory interview is when an employer asks you questions to gather information for which they may use to discipline you down the road, or you think there's going to be consequences as a result of you answering questions in this interview. It is important to outline real quickly what's not an investigatory interview. When management talks to you and they don't ask you any questions, that is not an investigatory interview, and you won't be entitled to have a shop steward present at that. Also, if management assures you going in that you're not going to get in trouble as a result of that interview, you're not going to get in trouble as a result of the interview, or they're not going to ask you any questions, they're just going to convey information to you. Those are not investigatory interviews, and these rights do not apply. So you've been asked by management to come in for an interview. We want to talk to you. Can you come into the office? Can we talk to you about something? What do? You ask for a union rep. You say, I'd like to have my shop steward or my union rep in for this investigatory interview, or just in the meeting, right? Because who runs around saying investigatory interview? So once you make that request, management only has three options. The first option is they get you your rep and they wait to proceed until your rep is present. It's option number one. Option number two is they just cancel the whole thing and let's call the whole thing off. We're not going to get the rep. We're not going to have the interview. Forget about it. Option number three, they can ask you to have the interview without a rep. And that includes pulling somebody up off the shop floor. It's the same thing as not having a rep. You either have your rep or you don't. They'll say, oh, we'll get another member. They can be your rep. That doesn't apply. It's either you with your rep or it's you. So option three is they conduct the interview with your permission without a rep. So what happens? You say, I want my rep, I want my steward, and the company just starts asking you questions like, where were you, or what were you doing, or how come you did this? At that point, after you make your request, if they ask you any more questions, that's an unfair labor practice. So here's where it gets tricky. They're asking you questions. You know it's an unfair labor practice charge. They can demand that you stay there and listen to these questions. Now, you can refuse to answer them, but you are required to sit there if they tell you, stay here, we're going to talk to you. Again, it's an unfair labor practice. Anything that they do subsequent to that's going to get thrown out, but they can nail you for insubordination if you get up and walk out. Very important that if they do violate the law and they keep asking you questions, that somebody follows up and files an unfair labor practice charge. It's like a no-brainer. Somebody else does all the work for your rep, and it's a nice rebuke on the company to remind them that people do have rights in the workplace, especially in a union workplace. Now, this last point is probably the most important. You only get these rights if you ask for them. These are not something you could say after you've answered questions that, oh, by the way, I didn't get my union rep. You have to ask for representation up front or none of this applies. Very important. So those are Weingarten Rights. I mean, how great is it being union? They can't ask you questions without a rep. Try that in any non-union workplace and see what happens. Till next time, it's Phil. Hope this helps somebody. Catch you later.